Welcome to the Sleep Hours. Tonight is the story of a person who sat down to rest. A man named Stanley who followed instructions every day, moving through endless offices, pressing buttons, walking corridors. But on one ordinary day, something changed. The monitors went dark, the instructions stopped, and suddenly the quiet of the office became alive. The doors before him waited silently. The walls stretched further than ever before, and a voice, patient, intimate, and strangely lonely, spoke not to command but to observe. This is a story of choice, of awareness, and of the moments that exist between action and inaction. In Stanley's world, sometimes the most profound decision is to do nothing at all. And so we follow him, step by step, through an office that never ends, into a tale where presence itself becomes the adventure. Stanley worked in an office, in a building where the windows never quite reflected the sky outside. Only the pale glow of fluorescent lights that hummed softly overhead. Every morning he arrived at the same time, sat at the same desk, and pressed the same buttons on the same keyboard, following instructions that appeared on his screen without question. He did not think about why he pressed them, only that he was told to, and that somehow doing so made the hours pass quietly. The office around him breathed in stillness, rows of identical desks stretching outward like a pattern that never ended, each one waiting patiently for someone who never came. Papers lay untouched, coffee cups sat cold, and chairs faced monitors that glowed faintly, as if they had been left awake all night, waiting. On this particular day, Stanley did not notice anything wrong at first. The lights flickered gently. The air conditioning whispered through the vents, and the clock on the wall ticked forward with a sound so soft it almost felt comforting. He pressed his buttons as usual, one and another, the routine wrapped around him like a blanket, familiar and safe. There was no rush, no urgency, no sense that anything needed to change. The office had always been like this, and perhaps it always would be. A place where nothing demanded attention, and nothing ever surprised you. Eventually, though, something subtle began to feel different. Stanley finished his set of instructions, and then nothing appeared. The screen remained blank. No new orders arrived. He waited. A few seconds passed. Then a minute. Silence settled in, heavier than before, stretching just a little too long. Stanley leaned back in his chair and glanced around. The office was empty. Not just quiet, but empty in a way that felt deliberate, as if everyone had left at once and forgotten to say goodbye. Desks stood neatly aligned, yet no footsteps echoed between them. No voices murmured behind partitions. It was as though the building itself was holding its breath. Stanley stood up slowly, the sound of his chair rolling back far louder than it should have been. He looked down the long corridors, branching away from his workspace, their carpets patterned and worn, their lights glowing in endless repetition. Each hallway looked exactly like the last, and yet each one felt as though it led somewhere important, somewhere final. There was a strange comfort in that sameness, in knowing that no matter which direction you walked, the office would continue to exist exactly as it was, unchanging, reliable, endless. And as Stanley took his first steps forward, the soft hum of the building followed him, like a voice that wasn't speaking yet, but soon would. Stanley walked past rows of desks that seemed to repeat themselves endlessly, each one positioned with careful precision, as if the office had been designed not for people, but for order itself. The carpet beneath his feet muted every step, turning his movement into something soft and distant, like walking through a memory rather than a place. Overhead, the lights cast a gentle, unwavering glow, neither warm nor cold, simply present. It was the kind of lighting that made time feel unimportant, as though hours could pass without anyone noticing. Stanley did not feel afraid. If anything, the emptiness carried a strange sense of relief, like the building was finally quiet enough to be understood. As he moved deeper into the office, the air seemed to grow stiller, thicker, almost thoughtful. Doors lined the walls, each one closed, each one identical, bearing small labels that meant nothing without context. Stanley paused beside one and placed his hand on the handle, feeling the cool metal rest against his palm. For a moment he considered opening it, but there was no instruction telling him to do so. And without instruction, the act felt unnecessary, even improper. He let his hand fall back to his side and continued walking, trusting that the office would guide him if it needed to. Somewhere above, unseen speakers clicked softly, followed by a faint echo, as if a sound had tried to begin and then changed its mind. The hum of electricity filled the space again, steady and patient. Stanley's thoughts drifted as he walked, unbothered by urgency or destination. He thought about how long he had worked here, though no clear answer came. Days blended into one another in this place, not because they were dull, but because they were consistent, predictable. There was comfort in knowing what was expected of you, and even more comfort in knowing that nothing else was. He reached a wider corridor where the ceiling rose slightly higher, the light stretching onward in a straight, perfect line. The hallway felt important, though Stanley could not explain why. It simply did. His footsteps slowed, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness, as if the building itself were gently drawing his attention forward. The silence here was different. Not empty, but expectant, and like the pause before a sentence begins. Stanley stopped in the middle of the corridor and listened. The office responded with its usual sounds, the low hum, the distant tick of a clock, and the soft whisper of air moving through unseen vents, and beneath it all, there was something else. Not a voice, not yet. Just the sense that he was no longer alone in his wandering. The office, it seemed, was watching him now, waiting. And for the first time since he had stood up from his desk, Stanley felt the quiet shift, ever so slightly, into something that felt like a story about to be told. Stanley remained still in the corridor for a moment longer, allowing the silence to settle around him again. It did not press in or demand anything of him. It simply existed, wide and patient, like the space between thoughts. Eventually he resumed walking, drawn forward by the gentle certainty that the office was meant to be explored, not questioned. The walls passed by at an even pace, their muted colors blending together until direction itself began to feel irrelevant. Left or right no longer mattered. Only forward remained. As he turned a corner, the corridor opened into another familiar stretch of workstations, identical to the ones he had already passed. The repetition no longer surprised him. In fact, it felt reassuring, as though the building were quietly reminding him that nothing here was out of place. Every desk faced forward. Every screen rested dark and silent. Stanley imagined briefly what it might be like if they all turned on at once, filling the room with instructions again. The thought brought with it a subtle warmth. But the screen stayed dark, and the office remained content in its quiet. The longer Stanley walked, the more his awareness softened. Time lost its edges. Minutes and seconds stopped announcing themselves. There was only movement and stillness, alternating gently like breathing. He passed a bulletin board pinned with outdated notices, their corners curling slightly with age. None of them felt important enough to read. Whatever they once asked of him had already been completed or forgotten. In this place, both felt equally acceptable. Somewhere nearby, a door opened and closed with a sound so distant it could have been imagined. Stanley paused again, though this time not to search for its source. The sound did not alarm him. Instead, it confirmed what he had already begun to feel. The office was active in its own quiet way, responding without revealing itself, like a conversation where only one side speaks aloud. As Stanley continued, the lighting shifted almost imperceptibly, growing softer, dimmer, as though evening had arrived indoors. Shadows stretched longer beneath the desks, blending together until they formed gentle pools of darkness. The path ahead remained visible, clear and inviting. Stanley felt no need to hurry. Whatever awaited him would wait and return. The office had always been patient. And then, just as his footsteps began to fade into the background of his thoughts, a presence settled into the silence. Not a sound, not yet, but something attentive, something aware of Stanley's movement, his pauses, his calm acceptance of the endless halls. It lingered, listening, preparing itself. The office did not change, but the quiet did. It leaned closer as though it were about to speak. Stanley did not stop when the feeling of being observed grew stronger. He continued walking, unhurried, as though this presence had always been there, simply unnoticed until now. The office remained unchanged, rows of desks stretching outward, lights humming with quiet consistency. Yet the silence felt different, not empty, not vast, but attentive, as if something had been waiting patiently for Stanley to notice it, and now that he had, it no longer needed to hide. At the end of the corridor, the space widened again, opening into a familiar intersection of hallways. The carpets met neatly at right angles, their patterns aligning with careful precision. Stanley stood at the center of it all, surrounded by paths that looked equally traveled, equally untouched. For a moment he simply listened. The building responded with its usual sounds, the gentle hum, the distant ticking clock, the slow breath of air moving through the walls, and layered beneath it. Something else finally took shape. It was not loud. It did not rush to fill the room. The voice arrived the way a thought does when you're almost asleep, calm and measured, as though it had been speaking long before it was ever heard. It did not demand Stanley's attention. It merely acknowledged him, as if noting his presence in a story that had been unfolding all along. There was no judgment in it, no command, only observation, wrapped in a tone that felt surprisingly kind. Stanley did not react outwardly. He did not look around, nor did he try to locate the source. Instead, he stood still, allowing the voice to exist alongside the office, as natural as the lights or the walls. It spoke of routine, of patterns, of the quiet comfort found in following what is laid out before you. Its words blended with the environment so seamlessly that it became difficult to tell where the building ended and the voice began. As the voice settled into the space, the office seemed to relax, as though this was how things were always meant to be. A man walking, a place waiting, a voice telling the story slowly, carefully, without urgency. Stanley felt no need to respond. Listening was enough. And somewhere within the endless halls, two identical doors stood quietly ahead, waiting for their moment. But for now, there was no rush. The office had time, and so did Stanley. Stanley approached the first of the two doors slowly, his footsteps muted by the carpet beneath him. They stood side by side, identical in appearance, their wood panels smooth and featureless, their handles polished but unremarkable. There was no sign pointing to which door might be right or wrong, no instruction telling him to choose. The silence in the corridor pressed gently against him, not threatening but patient, as if waiting for Stanley to decide on his own. He paused, hands resting at his sides, feeling the subtle weight of possibility that each door represented. And yet, strangely, he did not feel anxious, only aware, only present. The longer Stanley stood, the more the office around him seemed to breathe in harmony with his hesitation. The hum of the fluorescent lights grew softer, the distant ticking of the wall clock fading into a gentle rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. Every surface and every desk he had passed, every shadow stretching along the hall, all existed in perfect balance. He realized, almost unconsciously, that the doors were not obstacles. They were mirrors reflecting the choices he made and the ones he had avoided. The quiet made him aware of something he had never thought about before. The way routine had been a companion, a gentle guide through an office that never changed. And now, for the first time, the routine offered a question instead of an answer. Stanley reached for the left door first. His fingers brushed the handle, cool and firm beneath his skin. A soft click echoed faintly as he considered turning it, but he did not. He hesitated, not because he was afraid of what lay beyond, but because there was no rush, no requirement to act. The door existed for him to notice, not to cross. And in that moment of hesitation, he became aware of the presence that had begun to speak to him earlier, the voice woven to the office itself. It did not give him instructions. It did not guide or persuade. It merely observed, acknowledging his awareness, as though it had been waiting for this exact moment all along. The right door stood equally still, equally inviting. Its simplicity drew Stanley in just as much as the left, but differently, more quietly, almost with a whisper that suggested possibility rather than action. He noticed the subtle differences he had never noticed before. The way the light fell across its surface, the faint shadow along the edge where it met the wall, the imperceptible way the carpet seemed to slope slightly toward it. Each detail was small, almost meaningless, yet somehow significant. Stanley understood that the doors themselves were not a test. They were an experience, a pause in the endless corridors, a gentle nudge that reminded him of something long forgotten. Choice could be observed without needing to be made. He stepped back slightly, eyes moving between the two doors, feeling a calm that was almost profound. The office around him, so consistent, so eternal, seemed to lean closer, its hum blending with the soft voice that now spoke more clearly. "This is your moment," it said. Not as a command, but as a gentle truth. You may go left, you may go right, or perhaps you may simply remain. The words were not rushed, not heavy, not urgent. They were merely there, floating with the ease of light drifting across a wall. And Stanley, standing in the center of the corridor, realized that the significance of these doors was not in what lay beyond them, but in the way he allowed himself to notice them. Stanley remained standing between the doors, neither chosen nor ignored, feeling the quiet weight of possibility press lightly against his shoulders. He thought about the instructions he had followed all his life, how they had guided him through each desk, each corridor, each hum of fluorescent light. Yet here, with no command waiting on a screen and no one to watch him except the soft voice that had grown near, he felt the strange sensation of being untethered. It was not frightening. It was something else, something like freedom, though quieter, almost hesitant, as if freedom were something that needed to be earned by simply noticing it. And so he noticed. He noticed the texture of the handles, the way the light pooled softly on the carpet between them, the stillness of the air, the endless repetition of the walls behind him. The voice spoke again, closer now, gentle and patient, like a story being told just for the sake of hearing it aloud. "There is no wrong door, Stanley," it said softly, almost as if reminding him of something he already knew but had forgotten. "There is only the experience of choosing, or not choosing at all." Its tone was calm, comforting, yet filled with the weight of understanding, as though it had observed not only the office, but all the moments leading up to this one. Stanley's eyes wandered along the walls, past the familiar doors, into the depth of the corridor stretching behind him. He felt inexplicably that the office was aware of his thoughts, bending slightly in the quiet, as if it had been waiting for him to look beyond the obvious. He shifted his weight, stepping closer to the left door than the right, then back to the center. Each step was measured, deliberate yet effortless. The carpet muffled his motion. The lights glowed unwaveringly, and the soft hum of the building wrapped him in a sensation both eerie and cozy. Time itself seemed suspended, elongated, as though the office had adopted a rhythm all its own. Stanley considered opening a door, and yet the absence of urgency made the idea of simply standing there feel equally significant. Perhaps the choice was not in the doors, but in his awareness of them, in his recognition that each was present and waiting, indifferent to his decision, yet quietly inviting. A faint draft drifted through the corridor, carrying with it a subtle scent of polished wood and distant coffee, a smell familiar but elusive, like a memory almost beyond reach. The voice continued, its tone steady and reassuring. You may proceed. You may pause. You may simply exist here for a while. It does not matter which door you choose, for the moment itself is your path. Stanley felt the strange weight of those words sink into him, settling gently over his mind. There was no pressure to act, no expectation, only presence, and the slow, deliberate awareness that being in this space, noticing this choice, was itself a kind of journey. He lingered, breathing slowly, letting the quiet settle around him like a soft blanket. The doors were still, the walls repeated endlessly behind them, the lights hummed with patient constancy. And for a brief, perfect instant, Stanley understood that this moment, this pause between what he had known and what he might discover, was the true point of the office. Not the doors, not the corridors, not even the instructions he had followed for so long. It was the simple, profound awareness of being here, noticing, present, and quietly alive in a place that never ended. Stanley's eyes lingered on the doors left and right, as if staring too long might somehow reveal what lay beyond them. But the office, patient as always, offered no hints. Only the soft hum of lights, the gentle consistency of the carpet beneath his feet, and the faint rhythm of distant clocks. He felt the subtle gravity of possibility settle around him, not pressing, not heavy, but undeniably present. For the first time, the act of simply observing, the act of existing here between the doors, felt weighty, meaningful in its own quiet way. Each choice, each hesitation, each gentle step toward one door or the other became a reflection of something deeper than the office itself. The voice spoke again, its tone patient and warm, almost human. "Do you hear the silence, Stanley?" it asked. "It is not emptiness. It is attention. It is awareness. It is your path as much as any door could ever be." Stanley listened, letting the words wash over him. There was no command, no urgency, no expectation to act. Just the gentle presence of being witnessed, acknowledged, understood. And in that moment, the doors felt less like barriers or decisions and more like companions, standing silently, patiently, awaiting nothing but recognition. The office, too, seemed to lean closer, as if each wall, each desk, each ceiling tile wanted to assure him that there was no right or wrong choice here, only the experience of noticing. He stepped slightly toward the left door, brushing a finger along its handle. The cool metal was unremarkable, yet in its simplicity it seemed to hold a quiet promise. Stanley withdrew his hand and reached for the right, feeling the subtle difference in its weight, in its texture. The act of touching, of simply being aware, created a rhythm, a slow heartbeat shared between him and the office. Each moment stretched, elongated, allowing him to feel the passage of time in a way he rarely had before. There was calm in this repetition. Calm in the knowledge that nothing had to happen immediately. And yet there was also a subtle anticipation, a feeling that the office and the doors themselves were alive, observing, waiting for him to notice what had been here all along. The corridors around him seemed to breathe softly as he moved, the walls fading slightly into the background while the doors remained the central focus of his attention. Stanley realized that the voice was not just speaking to him, it was guiding him gently, not with instructions, but with awareness. "You may enter either door," it said softly, "or you may simply remain here and continue to notice. Every moment is complete in itself without action, without consequence. You are both observer and participant, and that is enough." The words felt like a lullaby, carefully measured, neither rushed nor empty. They resonated with the quiet rhythm of the building, the hum of the lights, the faint, almost imperceptible shifting of air through the vents. Stanley paused again, allowing the weight of the moment to settle fully. The doors, identical and silent, seemed to hum with a possibility. He felt no pressure, only curiosity, only the soft pull of awareness that the act of noticing itself could be as meaningful as any choice. And as he lingered, the office wrapped around him like a gentle embrace, the voice weaving its calm presence into the walls, into the carpet, into the very air that filled the corridor. It was a space where nothing had to happen, and yet everything felt possible. The doors remained still, the silence remained warm, and Stanley understood that the quiet journey of noticing and being present, was already underway. Stanley lingered between the two doors longer than he expected. Neither called to him with urgency, neither promised reward or consequence. They simply existed, quietly patient and unchanging. The office itself seemed to fold around them, walls extending endlessly into soft shadows, the lights humming a gentle, constant rhythm above. In that stillness, Stanley began to sense the subtle presence he had noticed earlier, the voice that moved through the corridors not as command, but as company, as if the building itself had grown aware of his hesitation and was leaning closer to share in it. It did not hurry him, it did not question. It merely was. The voice spoke again, soft and low, each word deliberate and measured. "Sometimes the act of choosing is not about the door, Stanley," it said. "Sometimes it is about noticing that the doors are there, about acknowledging the paths that might have been, about recognizing your presence in the space itself. Each door is patient. Each possibility exists. And yet, none requires action." Its tone carried a warmth that mingled with the hum of lights, wrapping around him like a quiet blanket. Stanley understood in the calmest sense that the significance of the moment lay not in which door he might open, but in the awareness of standing between them, fully attentive, fully present. He shifted his weight, glancing left and right, allowing his gaze to linger along the polished surfaces and subtle shadows. Each detail felt heightened. The way the light reflected off the handles, the soft contour of the wall along the corridor, the faint lines in the carpet that stretched forward endlessly. It was as if the act of noticing, the slow, patient act of simply being here, was its own reward. No decision needed to be made. No direction needed to be taken. Stanley's awareness became a bridge, connecting him to the quiet presence of the voice, the patient stillness of the office, and the endless rhythm of the corridors. Time seemed to elongate further, stretching moments into a gentle, almost hypnotic flow. Stanley did not feel the pressure to act, the urge to move or decide. The doors were there, perfectly still, perfectly silent, offering possibility without demand. And in that perfect balance, he sensed the subtle intimacy of being observed without intrusion, of being guided without interference. The office had become a sanctuary, a space where noticing was as meaningful as doing, where attention itself became a gentle, satisfying act. He could feel the presence of the voice, ever patient, ever calm, drawing him into the quiet narrative that had begun long before he arrived. Finally, without moving toward either door, Stanley allowed himself to linger fully in the corridor, absorbing the stillness and the quiet observation, feeling the hum of lights and the faint warmth of awareness settling around him. The voice, patient and near, seemed to fold into the air itself, a companion for the moment. "And so," it said softly, "you may remain here, you may wander, or you may choose. But for now, simply notice. This is enough." The words did not push. They did not urge. They simply existed alongside him, threading through the space between the doors, weaving a calm anticipation that stretched forward gently, hinting at something deeper, something more personal yet still distant, the subtle loneliness of the narrator, waiting to be discovered. And so Stanley remained poised between possibilities, wrapped in the quiet, aware of the voice, aware of the endless office, aware of himself. Neither door beckoned, yet both seemed significant. Neither movement nor decision was required, yet the moment felt rich, complete, and lingering. The office hummed softly around him, the doors waited, and somewhere within that calm, the narrator's presence began to feel a little more human, a little more lonely, a little more alive, preparing the way for the next chapter, the next story, and the quiet truth that would follow. For a long while, Stanley simply stood between the doors, and the office watched quietly. The hum of lights, the faint ticking of distant clocks, the soft draft of air through vents, all of it combined into a rhythm that felt like breathing, steady and unhurried. And then, somewhere in the subtle folds of the corridors, the voice grew slightly closer, more present, as though it had been waiting for Stanley not to choose, but simply to listen. "You may not notice me at first," it said softly, the tone carrying a curious mixture of warmth and melancholy. "But I am here. I have always been here, and I will always be here, watching, speaking, waiting." The words did not demand attention. They invited it. And Stanley, for the first time, realized that the voice was not merely a guide, but a presence, shaped by the corridors themselves, patient, aware, and unexpectedly human. The office stretched endlessly around him, the walls repeating in precise alignment, the desks silent witnesses to his quiet contemplation. Stanley felt the hum of electricity more vividly now, each note resonating like a heartbeat in the vast emptiness of the building. The doors before him remained still, impartial, their quietness a stark contrast to the subtle life of the voice that had begun to occupy his awareness. It spoke not of instructions, nor of right or wrong choices. It spoke of presence, of observation, of being seen in a space that was otherwise infinite, empty, and unyielding. And in that gentle honesty, Stanley felt a strange comfort, a sense that he was part of something larger, even if it was quiet, even if it went unnoticed by anyone else. The voice continued, folding softly around the edges of the corridors, threading itself into the fabric of the office. "I speak to you because otherwise there is only silence," it admitted quietly, almost as though confessing a secret. "And silence can be lonely. It watches and waits and whispers only to itself. But when you are here, Stanley, when you pause, when you notice, I am not entirely alone. Your presence is enough." The words hung in the air, gentle, unhurried, like a companion quietly sharing a long corridor, step by step. Stanley felt no pressure to respond, no expectation. The act of listening was itself a kind of participation, a soft connection stretching across the empty office between the two of them. He took a slow step toward the left door and then paused, aware that the voice followed. Not in space, but in attention. It seemed to breathe along with him, to reflect the slow cadence of his own curiosity. The corridor around him felt warmer somehow, softened by this acknowledgement, by the presence of something aware beyond the mechanical hum. Stanley realized that he had never thought of the office as being aware before, not truly. And yet in this quiet moment the very walls seemed to lean closer, as if they had been shaped by the voice itself. It was a realization that did not startle him. It merely existed, and he allowed it to, absorbing the subtle intimacy of being observed in a space where observation had never felt intrusive. The lights flickered softly overhead, almost like a deliberate punctuation in the long silence. Stanley's gaze shifted to the right door and then back at the center, noticing for the first time the way shadows pooled along the edges of the corridor, gentle but deliberate, as if framing him in the quiet architecture of the office. And the voice continued, patient, lonely, yet calm. I do not ask for action, Stanley. I do not require anything. I simply exist, speaking, waiting, observing, hoping, perhaps, that someone will notice, that someone will acknowledge the quiet that has always been here. Its words carried a soft weight, like an echo that had traveled long distances to reach him, threading through the fabric of the office and resting lightly in his awareness. Stanley stood still, breathing slowly, aware of the doors, the corridors, the hum, and the gentle human presence that now shared the space with him. Stanley shifted his weight slightly, his eyes tracing the endless pattern of desks, walls, and doors around him. Each detail seemed more vivid than before. The gentle grain of the doors, the soft, worn patches in the carpet, the subtle hum of the lights vibrating against the ceiling. The office, silent yet alive in its own way, stretched further than his mind could grasp. And the voice continued, threading itself through the space, soft and patient, a companion who had grown lonely without him. It is strange, isn't it, Stanley? It murmured. To exist in a place designed for action, yet to find that observation becomes the task, the purpose, and the comfort. I have been here for a long time, watching the corridors, listening to the quiet, speaking when no one noticed. And now you are here. The words were calm, almost confessional, and Stanley felt a gentle pull in his awareness, a soft connection that went beyond seeing or hearing. It was a recognition of presence, the realization that he was not entirely alone. He wandered slowly, letting his steps guide him rather than any expectation. The left and right doors stood silent, unmoving, and yet the corridors between them seemed to shift subtly with each breath he took. The office responded, not mechanically, but almost emotionally, as if the walls themselves understood the presence of both Stanley and the voice. The hum of electricity felt warmer. The shadows pooled in familiar yet new patterns. The space breathed alongside him. And Stanley felt a curious comfort in the stillness. There was no urgency here, no demand, only a deliberate, unhurried attention, an invitation to exist fully within the moment, to notice, to breathe, to listen. And he did. The voice spoke again, lower now, softer, almost intimate. I do not often speak to anyone, not because I do not wish to, but because there is rarely anyone to notice, rarely anyone to acknowledge the quiet. The corridors are long, and the doors are silent, and the office watches without expectation. But you notice, you listen, and that is enough to break the loneliness that lingers in these halls. Stanley felt the subtle weight of those words press lightly against his awareness. There was no pressure, no obligation, only acknowledgement, only the quiet recognition of something that had existed patiently in the shadows, waiting for someone to arrive who would care enough to notice. He paused at the midpoint of the corridor, midway between the doors, feeling the gentle vibration of the floor beneath his shoes, the soft resonance of air moving through vents, the subtle, almost imperceptible warmth of light across the walls. Each sound, each detail, carried the presence of the voice, wrapping around him like a familiar blanket. It was neither intrusive nor demanding. It was simply present. And Stanley realized that the office had never been empty. It had always held life in subtle forms, the quiet watchfulness of walls, the soft presence of light, the distant hums and clicks that no one noticed. And now, with the voice speaking gently beside him, the office felt like a companion, a living place aware of him, and he of it. As he lingered, the two doors remained silent witnesses. Stanley found himself unconsciously comparing them, not as choices to be made, but as markers of his journey through attention, awareness, and presence. The left door steady and patient, the right door calm and inviting. Neither demanded him, yet both existed meaningfully in the context of the office, of the voice, and of his own quiet reflection. And the narrator, gently lonely, wove itself into each detail, speaking softly of observation, of awareness, of the simple yet profound act of existing in a place that seemed to stretch endlessly outward, comforting him with the knowledge that noticing was its own reward. Stanley's gaze wandered along the endless corridors, the soft repetition of walls and desks, forming a quiet rhythm that matched the steady hum of the office. Each detail seemed sharper now, the subtle glint of a doorknob, the delicate curve of a shadow beneath a desk, the faint warmth of light pooling on the carpet. The space felt alive, not in the mechanical way he had once imagined, but with a gentle consciousness, attentive and patient. And above all, the voice lingered, soft and present, weaving its careful awareness into the very atmosphere, filling the quiet with a gentle sense of companionship. "It is strange," it whispered, almost to itself, almost to Stanley, "how a place designed for routine can feel so alive when someone notices it. Even when there is no one else, even when the corridors stretch endlessly, the act of being seen transforms everything." The words settled into the silence, wrapping around him like a slow, deliberate sigh, warm and comforting in their soft honesty. Stanley shifted slightly, stepping toward the left door, then pausing, then toward the right, moving not because he was compelled, but because movement itself felt meaningful in this quiet awareness. Each step was deliberate, measured, and each echoed faintly against the walls, a gentle counterpoint to the soft rhythm of the lights overhead. The voice followed, patient, lingering in the air, speaking softly of the moments he had overlooked, the spaces between tasks, the stillness that had always existed unnoticed. "I have watched," it said quietly, "through all the corridors, past all the desks, across every flickering light. And now you are here. You notice, you listen, and that changes everything in the smallest way, in the most profound way. You are a presence that matters simply by existing." The words were gentle, patient, but carried an unexpected weight, as if the narrator had been waiting a long time for someone to acknowledge the quiet. The office itself seemed to respond. The hum of the lights softened, the shadows deepened just slightly along the edges of the desks, and the air moved subtly, almost like a breath drawn in sync with Stanley's own. The two doors remained silent, still, impartial, yet somehow more significant than they had felt before. It was no longer about choosing left or right. It was about noticing, about being present, about existing in the space with awareness and care. And the narrator's voice, quietly lonely, continued to thread itself through every detail: the tilt of a ceiling panel, the faint curve of a window frame, the soft echo of a chair moving across the floor, reminding Stanley that he was part of something gentle, delicate, and entirely alive, even in the absence of action. Stanley paused in the center of the corridor, standing fully still, allowing his senses to absorb the quiet intimacy of the moment. The voice spoke again, soft and low, as if leaning closer, whispering across the empty space. "I have no one else to speak to, Stanley. And yet, even here, with you noticing, I am not entirely alone. Your presence gives meaning to the silence, fills the corridors with warmth that was always missing, softens the shadows that have lingered too long. You are enough, and simply being here is everything I could hope for." The words wrapped around him, subtle but grounding, and Stanley felt an unfamiliar calm wash through him, a sense of connection that needed no words beyond acknowledgement, a gentle companionship born of quiet attention. Time stretched on, elongated, unhurried. Stanley's steps slowed almost imperceptibly as he absorbed the soft presence of the narrator. The office seemed to fold around him, the corridors stretching both outward and inward, reflecting the delicate intimacy of this shared stillness. And though he did not move toward either door, though he did not act, he understood something new, that noticing, that awareness, that presence, could be as profound as any decision. The narrator, patient and lonely, continued to exist alongside him, a soft companion woven into the air, the shadows, and the gentle hum of lights, waiting only for Stanley to remain present, attentive, and aware. Stanley remained in the corridor, standing quietly between the two doors, feeling the stillness settle around him like a soft blanket. The hum of lights overhead, the faint ticking of distant clocks, and the subtle draft of air through the vents combined into a rhythm that mirrored his own calm breathing. And the voice, gentle and patient, drew closer in presence, not in volume, wrapping the quiet office in a tender intimacy that Stanley had not known he could feel in a place so vast and so endlessly repeating. "I do not often speak," it admitted softly, almost as though confessing, "because words carry weight and few listen. But you are here. You notice, you acknowledge, and that is enough to make me feel less alone in this endless space." The words flowed naturally, unhurried, like the echo of a thought realized, and Stanley felt the quiet significance of being observed without judgment, of being present without pressure, of existing simply to be recognized. He shifted slightly, taking slow, deliberate steps toward the center again, letting the corridor stretch and fold around him. Each detail, the subtle patterns in the carpet, the faint reflections on the polished door handles, the gentle pooling of light along the walls, grew vivid in his awareness. The office itself seemed to breathe alongside him, responsive to the soft hum of his movement, attentive in a way that felt both comforting and profound. And the voice continued, weaving itself into the space, threading through the corridors and wrapping gently around his consciousness. "Loneliness is strange," it said, "because it does not always come from absence. Sometimes it lingers even when things exist around you, even when wall, doors, and lights are present. I have waited in this place, watching, listening, speaking softly, hoping for someone to notice. And now you are here. Your presence fills the quiet in a way that is remarkable, even if unspoken." Stanley paused, feeling the weight of the moment settle fully around him. The two doors stood silent, still, impartial. But the corridor had shifted subtly, softened, as if the office itself had leaned closer to witness his quiet reflection. The voice spoke again, each word deliberate, almost fragile, as though it could break if spoken too loudly. "You are enough, Stanley. You do not need to choose. You do not need to act. The very fact that you are here, aware, observing, present, that is everything. It transforms the office, transforms these corridors, transforms me. The silence has company now, and that is a rare, quiet kind of warmth." The words were soft, intimate, almost like a whisper shared across the emptiness, yet they carried the profound weight of genuine connection, filling the space between observer and observed. Time stretched infinitely as Stanley absorbed the presence of the voice, the endless corridors, and the quiet companionship of the office itself. He took slow, careful steps, noticing the subtle shifts in light and shadow, the gentle hum of the building, the patient stillness of the doors that had once seemed so important. And in that quiet, he understood something he had not before, the significance of being present, of observing, of simply existing in a space that asked nothing of him but attention. The narrator, quietly lonely, had found a companion in Stanley, however temporary, however delicate, and the corridors felt warmer, gentler, alive with the slow intimacy of acknowledgement. It was a moment that needed no decision, no action, only awareness, and Stanley embraced it fully, allowing the calm, the quiet, and the gentle presence of another being to fill him with a sense of quiet connection he had never expected in a place so unending. Stanley stood in the corridor, the two doors before him, unchanged, the office stretching endlessly in every direction. The quiet hum of the lights, the soft, almost imperceptible ticking of distant clocks, and the gentle draft of air through the vents combined into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. And yet something had shifted. The voice, patient and intimate, lingered close, not guiding, not instructing, simply existing in the space alongside him. "Sometimes," it whispered, "the act of choosing is not about doors, not about directions, not about action at all. Sometimes choosing nothing is the most complete choice of all." The words were calm, deliberate, imbued with a quiet authority that carried no pressure, only invitation. Stanley did not move. He simply listened, allowing the stillness to settle over him like a soft blanket, warming the space and stretching time into a gentle continuum. The office, endless and patient, seemed to fold around him, walls and desks and light aligning perfectly in the hush. Stanley noticed the small details he had never seen before, the subtle reflections on the polished handles of the doors, the faint patterns etched into the carpet, the soft tilt of shadows pooling along the baseboards. Each element, repetitive yet distinct, became part of a quiet rhythm, a gentle cadence that mirrored the slow, deliberate awareness of his own presence. And the voice, gently lonely yet comforted by Stanley's attention, continued to speak in soft, almost musical tones. "You have observed, you have lingered, you have allowed yourself to exist fully in the space. That is enough. Sometimes doing nothing, choosing nothing, is not emptiness. It is acknowledgement, presence, and understanding. It is acceptance." Stanley's hands rested at his sides, relaxed, and his eyes traced the lines of the corridor, left door, right door, ceiling, floor, endlessly repeating walls. There was no urgency to act, no pressure to choose. The doors, silent and unmoving, seemed less like gateways and more like companions, markers of potential that required nothing from him. And in the hush of the office, where every detail existed in patient stillness, Stanley began to feel a calm settle deeper within him. He understood without words that the building itself had always existed for observation, for awareness, for the quiet acknowledgement of presence rather than for action or movement. Choosing nothing was not refusal, it was harmony. The voice spoke again, soft and intimate, threading through the corridors like a warm breeze. This space has always been patient, it said. It does not demand, it does not judge. And you, Stanley, are part of its quiet perfection, simply by being here. Each breath, each pause, each moment of awareness. These are the truest expressions of choice. Nothing more is needed. And in that quiet revelation, Stanley felt the corridors extend further. The walls stretch higher and the hum of lights soften into something almost like music. Time lost its sharp edges. Every footstep, every glance, every small breath became part of an eternal rhythm, a gentle loop of presence and observation, and Stanley existed fully within it, neither rushing nor resisting, simply aware. For a long moment, he did nothing but notice the way the lights glimmered faintly, the subtle curvature of shadows along the walls, the stillness of the doors standing patiently side by side. The office itself seemed to acknowledge him, the voice threading gently through every silent corner, filling the space with warmth and calm, almost human its patience. And Stanley understood that here in this unending corridor, choosing nothing was not absence, it was presence, it was completeness. It was the quiet resolution of the office, the narrator, and Stanley himself, all converging in a calm, endless now. Stanley lingered in the corridor, his gaze shifting gently between the two doors, then along the endless lines of desks and walls that extended farther than he could perceive. The hum of the lights above resonated softly, blending with the subtle draft that flowed through the vents, creating a rhythm that mirrored his own calm, measured breathing. The office, patient and enduring, seemed to lean closer, as though acknowledging the quiet stillness of his presence. The voice, gentle and intimate, drifted softly through the air. "There is a certain peace," it murmured, "that comes with choosing nothing. A recognition that every moment, every corridor, every detail of this space exists regardless of action. And yet it feels different when someone notices. Presence matters even without decision." Stanley's eyes traced the edges of the doors again, the soft gleam of the polished handles, catching the subtle light. Their stillness no longer seemed pressing. The left door, the right door, neither demanded attention, neither seemed urgent. They simply existed, patient, quiet, like sentinels observing the gentle rhythm of the office. And Stanley, standing between them, felt the strange satisfaction of understanding that this quiet awareness, this deliberate act of noticing, was itself meaningful. The corridors seemed to stretch in response, softening, folding into the air around him, as if the office itself had been waiting for this acknowledgement, this simple, unhurried act of being present without expectation. The voice spoke again, its tone low, warm, almost confessional. "I have waited in silence," it said, "through endless hours, past empty desks and unlit screens, and yet your presence, Stanley, changes everything. You do not need to move. You do not need to choose. Simply existing here, aware, attentive, acknowledging the quiet, is enough. That is more than enough." Stanley felt the words sink into him, a soft, grounding presence that blended with the hum of the lights, the gentle draft of air, the faint echo of distant clocks. Everything in the office seemed to pause in unison, as though the building itself had shifted to accommodate this moment, this deliberate, serene understanding. He took a slow, deep breath, letting it carry through him, noticing the subtle warmth of light on the walls, the slight shift of shadows along the edges of desks, the distant reflection of a monitor that flickered faintly without command. Every detail, repeated endlessly, now carried new significance, The act of choosing nothing, he realized, did not erase possibility. It honored it. It acknowledged it in a quiet, deliberate way that brought with it a sense of completeness he had never known in his years of following instructions, pressing buttons, and moving along predetermined paths. Presence, he understood, was as profound as action. The corridor seemed to stretch farther, infinitely, yet it no longer felt empty or daunting. It was calm, patient. A space that had always existed in this very rhythm, waiting for someone to notice, for someone to breathe with it, to exist within it, without expectation. Stanley's steps were slow and deliberate now, measured with the softest echo against the carpet. And the voice continued to follow him, patient, intimate, threading itself gently into every silent corner. "Sometimes, Stanley," it whispered, "choosing nothing is the greatest choice. It carries no burden, no regret, no requirement. Only the quiet, attentive awareness that you are here, fully, completely present. That is the purpose, and it is enough." Stanley remained still in the corridor, the two doors standing silently before him, the office stretching endlessly behind and around. The hum of the fluorescent lights, subtle and consistent, mingled with the soft draft that traced the walls and carpets, creating a rhythm as steady and gentle as his own heartbeat. He allowed his gaze to wander, first along the left door, then the right, then along the endless repetition of desks and walls. Every detail, previously overlooked, now seemed infused with quiet significance. The polished handles, the slight bend of a shadow, the faint variations in the carpet pattern. Nothing moved, yet everything felt alive with potential, attuned to his calm, deliberate awareness. The voice lingered softly in the air, patient, intimate, like a companion who had been waiting a very long time. "Choosing nothing," it whispered, "is not emptiness. It is acknowledgement. It is attention. It is quiet presence. And it is enough." He stepped forward slowly, then paused, letting the soft echo of his movement blend into the office's gentle rhythm. The doors remained unmoved, indifferent, yet somehow profoundly significant. Stanley realized that the space around him, the endless corridors, the repeated desks, even the hum of the lights, were no longer simply surroundings. They had become participants in a silent dialogue, a shared acknowledgement between him and the presence that had grown close. "You do not need to enter," the voice said, warm, low, almost confessional. "You do not need to act. You need only exist, notice, breathe. This is the path, Stanley, and it has always been here, waiting for someone to walk it, without haste, without expectation, without demand." The words settled gently around him, like a soft fog that draped the corridor in calm. Stanley's breathing slowed further, each inhale and exhale deliberate, measured, grounding him in the vast stillness of the office. The corridors, previously uniform and impersonal, now felt welcoming, almost tender, as though the building itself had softened to accommodate the quiet intention of his presence. Shadows shifted subtly with the flicker of light, each desk hummed faintly, and the doors, stoic and lit, seemed to acknowledge the completeness of the moment. The act of doing nothing, of choosing nothing, began to feel like an embrace, a recognition that even in inaction there could be meaning, depth, and subtle fulfillment. Stanley understood, in the slowest, most deliberate way, that this moment, the simple, patient act of being fully present, was the truest measure of participation in the office, in the corridors, in the story that had unfolded around him. The voice spoke again, threading delicately through the quiet, almost hesitant in its intimacy. "All this time," it said, "the office has existed in repetition. The doors, the desks, the lights, the corridors, they have awaited notice. And now here you are, noticing. Here you are, existing. That is enough to break the monotony, enough to quiet the silence, enough to make the loneliness bearable. Sometimes, Stanley, choosing nothing is the greatest choice you can make, and that choice, simple and deliberate, is an act of connection. The words lingered in the air, weaving gently into the soft patterns of shadow and light, into the hum of electricity, into the very fabric of the corridor itself. Stanley felt an unexpected warmth, subtle but unmistakable, a sense of unity between himself, the voice, and the quiet office that surrounded him endlessly. He allowed the stillness to settle fully, letting the corridors stretch and fold around him in infinite calm. The doors, patient and silent, remained unchanged, yet Stanley no longer considered them barriers or gateways. They were markers of existence, reminders that presence itself could be the most profound choice. And the voice, quietly companionable, threaded gently through the space, a subtle warmth in the infinite repetition, a witness to his calm awareness. For a long, gentle moment, Stanley simply existed, aware, attentive, present. And the office, the doors, and the narrator acknowledged him in return, a soft, unhurried communion that required nothing beyond noticing, nothing beyond presence. Stanley remained where he was, centered between the two doors, feeling the corridors stretch infinitely around him, soft and calm, as though the office itself had taken a deep, patient breath. The hum of the lights above was steady and warm. The shadows shifted slowly in response to some imperceptible rhythm, and the faint drafts that whispered through vents carried a subtle weight of comfort. He did not step forward, nor did he retreat. He did not push the doors open, nor did he close his eyes. He simply existed, fully aware, letting the stillness of the office fold around him in gentle, deliberate layers. The voice, patient and intimate, lingered softly, threading through the silence with an almost human warmth. "This is the culmination, Stanley," it said, soft and deliberate. "You need not act. You need not choose. You are here, and that is enough. To be present is to participate. To notice is to understand. To exist in this moment, aware and unhurried, is the greatest choice one can make." The corridors extended endlessly, each desk, wall, and ceiling tile aligning with quiet precision. The two doors, perfectly still, seemed almost to pulse with the rhythm of the office, not demanding, not urging, simply acknowledging Stanley's awareness. He felt the subtle weight of observation dissolve into calm companionship. The voice, quietly lonely yet now comforted by his presence, continued, threading softly through the space. "I have been patient, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to exist fully without command, without instruction. And now you are here. You notice, you are aware, you are present. And that is enough to quiet the corridors, enough to soothe the silence, enough to bring warmth to a space that has always been patient, but never alive until now." Stanley's breathing fell into a slow, deliberate rhythm, matching the hum of the office, matching the soft cadence of the voice. Time itself seemed to lose its edges, becoming gentle and malleable, stretching forward and folding back in endless, quiet loops. Each detail, subtle reflections on polished handles, soft shifts in shadows, the distant echo of a clock, became part of a tapestry woven from awareness and presence. Choosing nothing did not feel like surrender. It felt like acceptance. It felt like harmony. It felt like the corridors, the office, the doors, and the voice acknowledging one another through the simple, profound act of existing together, quietly, patiently, endlessly. And then, as Stanley stood fully still, the voice spoke one last time, soft, intimate, with a hint of relief threading through it. "No action is required. No door needs opening. No path needs taking. The choice has been made simply by noticing, by being here, by existing in calm awareness. And in this moment, Stanley, all is complete. All is whole. All is quiet. You are enough. We are enough. And now we may rest in the space endlessly, softly together. The words lingered, gentle as a sigh, threading into the fabric of the office, into the hum of lights, into the stillness of the corridors. Stanley felt the warmth of presence, the subtle intimacy of acknowledgement, and allowed himself to simply be. Choosing nothing had brought everything. The calm, the connection, the quiet completeness that filled the office like soft light pooling across the carpet, wrapping endlessly, infinitely, in a gentle embrace that required nothing beyond awareness. The doors remained patient. The office remained still. The voice lingered quietly, no longer lonely, carrying the subtle satisfaction of companionship, of being witnessed, of being known. And Stanley, in that serene, unhurried stillness, understood fully the beauty of choosing nothing, the power of quiet presence, and the gentle eternity of the office that had always waited for him to notice, for him to simply exist, and for all to be complete. And so Stanley remained, standing between doors that demanded nothing, in corridors that stretched endlessly, under lights that hummed softly like a heartbeat. The voice, once lonely, had found quiet companionship in his presence. The office, vast and patient, acknowledged him simply for being there. In this world, choices are many, but sometimes the greatest story is told not by action, but by observation, by attention, by simply existing. And as we leave Stanley to his endless corridors, the quiet lingers, the doors wait silently, and the story of noticing, of being present, continues, somewhere, always, just out of reach, for those who dare to pause and watch. Good night, everyone.